This meeting is being recorded.
All right, I think we'll get started. So welcome everyone to this session. I'm going to share my screen here. Unfortunately, my video goes off when that happens, but anyway, I will start the slideshow on this screen. Okay, so yeah, welcome to this session at the 19th RDA Plenary. This is, the session is entitled Life Science Data Worldwide, and we have an agenda here. So I'll just quickly say that we'll do a little bit of introductions and welcome. We're a new interest group, the Life Sciences Data Infrastructure Interest Group. So we'll go over the charter, then we'll go on to an icebreaker of who's here. And really questions to you guys about how do you think the interest group should function and what might we work on. We have a few current participating infrastructures, so we'll have 5-minute flash talks from each of those infrastructures. And then we'll really go on to, discussing how do we see this group fitting into the rest of the Research Data Alliance, and also really, other discussions, and then about, and that will be based on an icebreaker poll we're going to do shortly. Okay, so just a bit of housekeeping before we go on. If you could put your video on, that would be great. It's really nice to see who's there. Also, if you can mute when not speaking, that would be great, just to stop background noise. If you have any questions, please raise them at any time by putting them, writing in the Zoom chat window or raising your hand. And of course, we're still in a world where people are working from home, so children and pets are very welcome. I just also point out that, please abide by the RDA Code of Conduct. Basically, this, in a nutshell, that's, we're acting courteously and professionally to each other. Okay, so the goal really, and welcome again to everyone here. As I said, this is the first meeting of the RDA Life Sciences Data Infrastructure Interest Group. And this is our webpage. It's here on the URLs at the top. And currently it has 4 co-chairs. So I'm one of the co-chairs. I'm from Australia, from an organisation called the Australian Biocommons. And 2 of the other co-chairs are here. So Susan, would you like to unmute and quickly introduce yourself?
Happy to. Hi, Susan Gregor here, the Associate Director of Data Science at the National Institutes of Health, and super happy to be a co-chair in this new working group or interest group.
Thanks, Susan. And Volmar.
Hello, I'm Volmar Åkerström. I'm part of the Elixir Swedish node, and I'm a data steward there. So this is very interesting and relevant for both the Elixir network and me personally. So looking forward to working with this.
Thank you. The other co-chair who can't join us today is Nicola Mulder. So she's from the University of Cape Town and H3A Bionet, which I'll provide a little bit of information on later. I'd also like to welcome Alicia Wood-Charlson here, who is from the US Department of Energy, who is from another of the foundational infrastructures here. We'll hear more from Alicia later on. Okay, so I guess we haven't sort of come from nothing. There was a previous interest group in RDA called the Elixir RDA Bridging Force interest group, and that ran from 2014 to 2021. And I think Volmar's going to give us a little bit of an insight later into what that interest group got up to. But I just wanted to, send a really big thanks to Rob Hooft from the Dutch Tech Centre for Life Sciences for getting the ball rolling on this. And he did tweet the other day that he won't be there, but he's hoping all the best for the discussion. So thanks, Rob. Okay, so I thought it would be useful just to recap interest groups in the context of RDA and what they're about. So I'm not going to read through all of this, but I have highlighted some things in blue and in bold. So the interest groups are comprised of experts from the community that are committed to directly or indirectly enabling data sharing, exchange, or interoperability. These groups develop charters that undergo a review process before the group is endorsed by RDA. So our charter's actually been developed and has been endorsed. And what interest groups do in the context of RDA is we produce deliverables. They could be surveys, they could be reports, or they could be working group case statements. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that is in a minute. The groups must have international participation and a demonstrator community, and there should not be for promoting specific projects or technologies. So we definitely tick the bill on that one. And in the context of RDA, they're seen as long-term initiatives, and it, this group will remain in operation as long as we remain active. So interest groups may do various things. So we may serve as a platform that leads to the formation of one or more working groups. So I guess the difference between working groups are that they tangibly accelerate progress. They really do projects that, I guess, deliver, tangible deliverables out of that. We may also support and coordinate work with support communication and coordination amongst a number of other working groups or interest groups that might be grouped by a theme. We can help to enable better communication and coordination between different working groups and interest groups. Or we could also work, I guess, in a more outward-facing capacity within the RDA by fostering synergies and bringing new group members to RDA and bringing the group's activities to the attention of external parties. And I think, personally, for this working group, I think that's something we really want to focus on. We're really interested in bringing infrastructures from around the world into this group to have a global discussion. Just worth noting that any member of the RDA can join an interest group, and you just do that by going to the page and selecting Join Group on the right-hand side. So if you're not a member of the group, I urge you to join the group now. Okay, so today's goal, really, I guess where we're at is that, as I mentioned, that our charter has been endorsed by the RDA Technical Advisory Board. And this is our first meeting. And we, the co-chairs, have really see it as an opportunity to meet and greet, get to know each other a little bit more, discuss how we fit together and into the broader RDA, and to plan work moving forward and how we want to operate. Okay, so the charter, again, this rather long URL is where you find our charter, but it's linked from our interest group page. I'll just briefly go over that too. So really where we're coming from is the life sciences are becoming increasingly data intensive, and a lot of that is due to new technology that is allowing omics data to be generated at scale. Decreasing costs has led to that. And there really is a need for large-scale sustainable and interoperable data management and storage methods that allow access to that. There is also, an increasingly need to integrate data of different types. So, life science research data is not just omics data, so it's not just genomic or nucleotide sequencing data. There's a whole load of other stuff out there: phenotyping, imaging, biosample management. We consider all these to be part of life science data, and any sort of omics focused life science data systems need to interoperate with those. And then I think it's also worth noting that in life science there are, I guess, sub-disciplines such as health, food production, bioindustry, environmental science. All of those groups are experiencing similar issues, and really we want to think about what's missing there to enable or to facilitate better use of cross-disciplinary data. It's also just pointing out that life sciences actually gave birth to the FAIR principles. So the second part of, I guess, in our charter, the context is we see that we formed to serve as a bridge between life science data infrastructures in different regions of the world, and we're represented by a few of these now, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, about who we are, but also, as a bridge with other relevant RDA interest groups, and we'll talk quite a bit about that later in the session. We aspire to have meaningful representation from diverse geographical regions all around the world. At the moment, we have representation from Oceania, Africa, Europe, and the US, but obviously we want to expand that as much as we can. And one thing we aim to do is actively seek participation from groups all around the world, including the Global South. And we also aim for fair gender representation and inclusivity in all of our activities. So the initial collaborating life science infrastructures, the logos are shown here on a map. We'll hear about from all of these later, so I won't dwell on that for the time being. Anytime this list is open to other regional or topical or thematic initiatives with a compatible remit. So we want this to be an open group where anyone is welcome to join in these discussions. As I said, we'll actively seek out and invite participation going forward. And at no time do we foresee there'll be any limitations to membership of this interest group. And just a little bit also in the charter, we do mention a few existing collaborations, and we'll go into a bit more of this later on each of our participating infrastructures. You know, there's multiple global efforts that we're all involved with. And I think in the interest of time, I will move on to this. So thank you for that. What we're going to do now is a little bit of an icebreaker activity. So if everyone can either, you can go to that URL, or if you've got your phone handy, I recommend using your phone. So you should be able to scan that QR code. And I think I will hand over to Volmar to run us through this.
Yes, so basically we have just a few questions that we would like to ask you and get a sense of who is in the room. So once you have been able to get into the URL, I think you can also find the link in the chat now. So if you open that, you will see first a slide introducing this questionnaire. And if you've managed to connect, you can click the upward thumb at the bottom right there. So please do that, and we will know that you have arrived in the Mentimeter or poll correctly. So I can see one thumb up here. And it's not moving.
I might need to refresh.
That should not be necessary.
5 now.
Oh, right. So it seems you don't get the live view on your screen. That is pretty inconvenient, I guess, but we will work with it. So participations, we have people from many different places. I'm going to add mine as well. So now we're seeing some results. And I guess we're kind of Europe, US, Australia centric. NARM, I'm not sure where that is. Maybe we can do a last refresh. And if someone would like to explain what NARM is, you can just write it into the chat. I'm curious to know. Otherwise,
I think that is the Indigenous name for Melbourne.
Oh, great, great. There we go. So we have some idea of where we're from, at least. For the next question, it's related to your position in the life sciences infrastructure domain. So, I mean, how do you identify yourself? Do you see yourself as a user of infrastructure for research, or are you a support providing person, or do you coordinate it or something like that? And we already have a few responses, 3 so far. There's quite a few options on this one, so let's see, how many are we? We're 10 people in the room. Maybe we can give it one more refresh or so.
Yep.
All right, so We are mostly people working at infrastructures, I guess. And not much from funders. And not much from research. And I was kind of expecting that. It would be nice to get some engagement from users of research infrastructure, I guess, but this is probably not the fora for it. So for the next question, it's about your expectations and why you went into this session. What are some examples of what you would like to take away from this? This is just free text, so feel free to add any keyword that just describes and maybe we can have a refresh on this as well. Oh, pardon me, I have a cold here. How well coordination, collaborative initiatives, RDA output adoption, that's a good one actually. Working examples, coordination, global view of life sciences. Yeah, I think this is all interesting and I think this kind of hits the mark in a sense. I don't think that we're going into details of any RDA output adoption cases today, but I mean, I think this is the right fora for having those discussions on relevant RDA outputs to adopt or promote. All right, so we can, if we move on to the next one, or we only have 6 people, maybe we can give it one more. Oh,
sorry.
Let's check the next one, and that's top challenges, and we're also maybe using this as some sort of input to future work, I guess. So I see standards, interoperability, user focus, security, working groups, cross coordination. Yeah, so some practical things and some tactical things, I guess. And I think that together we should probably have a better chance of addressing all of these. So for the next one, that is a truly open-ended question. If you have any suggestions for topics that we could be discussing during this session, you could just explain that in a few words. And then we will pick one of these topics to include in the final part of this session.
Nothing so far.
Yeah, I think it takes a little while to type out your thoughts, and I mean, if you haven't thought of something before, then let me see. I added one here. So balancing bottom-up versus innovation. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I guess bottom-up, I mean, innovation can be done bottom-up, I guess, but this would be more concerted efforts for innovation driven by some sort of directives on the steering part of the infrastructure or something like that. Or is it on the life sciences as a total, perhaps? I think all of these could be interesting. Yes, and then my own pet peeve at the moment is connecting life science infrastructure to real world scenarios, use cases, and things like that. And then we had one access, interoperability, reuse, and preservation cases. And then we had one for support for common analysis across global infrastructures. Yes, finding some common ground and reusable workflows, I guess. How this group can complement and build on existing frameworks, expanding federal open science, supporting or providing use case resources and tools. Yeah, that's a big topic for discussion. Maybe we can break that down to something as well. Many early career research on the learning curve. Yeah, training is a really important aspect of infrastructure, I think, as well, and should not be neglected. And what are a few capabilities that we can implement or standards we can adopt for interoperability? Yeah, that's a very hot topic, I would think. Both in Europe in general and at Elixir for sure.
All right. Shall we?
Okay. So we have, I think, enough topics that we could be discussing. And I guess we can move on into the next section.
All right. Okay, so now we're just going to hear briefly from each of the participating infrastructures here. As I said, we'll hear from each of these. I just wanted to stress that these groups are just the beginning, and others are more than welcome. In fact, we want, representation from across the entire world. So please reach out if you are representing another infrastructure. So as I said, Nikki Mulder can't make it here today, but I'm just going to present on her behalf around H3A Bionet, which is a Pan-African informatics network, and it's providing bioinformatics infrastructure and support for a consortium in Africa called the H3 Africa Consortium. And that's got 28 partners across 17 countries and over 200 members. I have mostly been aware of the excellent work that they're doing through distributed bioinformatics training, but there's a lot of other things happening. So they're developing, as I said, bioinformatics and data analysis skills across Africa, but also looking at, providing and developing infrastructure for data transfer, storage, analysis, and that's compute tools and workflows across the continent, and also focusing on data management and harmonization tools. The major activities and collaborations are listed on this slide. So as I mentioned, H3A Bionet really work in a very collaborative nature internationally. So in bioinformatics training, they're part of the global Goblet network, ISCB and Elixir training. They're associated with all of those, as well as other open data initiatives within Africa. They're involved in the development and deployment of data standards and harmonization. They do a lot of work in the human genomics space, which obviously is focused on African populations, which is a group that has been underrepresented internationally, I think, in human genomics efforts. They are also working on tools for imputation, statistical analysis, and human pangenome. So again, as I said, really important that this group is represented in the Human Pangenome Reference Consortium. Another project that they are coordinating or involved with is the Africa Biogenome project. So that's a conservation project looking at native African species and developing genomic resources from them. And then also thinking about, you know, ways in which data can be stored from there. So they have focuses on, you know, again, the storage of these human genomes coming from African populations, and work closely with EGA and ClinVar on that. As Nikki said here, the collaborations are really enabling African science and data to align with global standards and to remain internationally relevant. Okay, so that's probably a really bad introduction for HA Bionet, but next time at the session at a different time zone, we'll be able to hear from Nikki herself. So now I'm going to pass over to Volmar, who's going to tell us about Elixir.
All right, thank you. So Elixir is basically a network of national scientific communities, and it consists of a hub and 22 national nodes, where each node runs services and supports local users. So in essence, it's a European-wide federated infrastructure, and we aim to kind of streamline storage, discovery, access, exchange, and analysis of scientific data. And that covers things like repositories that we promote and support that are kind of long-term sustainable. Services that make data interoperable, and that means, for example, promoting standards, workflows, and exchange platforms for information or resources that you could use to make your data interoperable. We also try to bridge compute facilities and promote software for different types of analysis. And also provide registries to make these visible and accessible. And then we also have some training resources that we promote, and all of this is provided by the different nodes and made available to a large extent to the wider Elixir community across Europe. In total, I've seen that it's more than 700 researchers. I'm not really sure who's counted in that, but it's a large network nonetheless. And we had a physical all-hands meeting just recently. I think we had 300 members participating there, and that was not nearly enough to cover everyone who wanted to join, sadly enough. And over 220 research institutes. So each node actually represents several institutes in each country. So we can go to the next slide. Elixir is also supposed to support services across all the domains of the life sciences. And so far, we have formed several communities, which brings together people who are interested in a particular domain or a particular type of service. And these communities rely on central infrastructure that cuts across all of the different communities, common concerns, if you will. And these are called platforms. So in total, we have many services across the different nodes, but they are organized into these 5 platforms, which are tools, compute, training, interoperability, and data. And on top of those platforms, we have communities, which currently are 13, I think, which is more than you can see on the picture here. And I'm not going into all of them, but one example is a community on human data, which is more on kind of a type of data than it is about a certain type of research. But then you also have plant science, and these have kind of a formal process of forming, similar to what we can see in the RDA of creating an interest group. And they, I don't think they have a life cycle where we actually kind of say that they conclude. So they are very similar to the interest group venue that we have here. We also have focus groups, which are more focused on a specific topic. And currently there are 12 of them. The RDA focus group or RDA activities focus group is one of them, which is the Elixir mirror of this interest group in a sense. And then we also have a host of EU projects and internal projects that aim to drive the development of services and knowledge exchange across Elixir. So we can skip to the next slide. And the RDA activities focus group, it aims to bridge from Elixir into the different communities that are in the RDA. And it's been around for a long time, long before I joined Elixir. And I think in 2014 or so, they created this interest group for the Elixir bridging force. And the RDA is part of the Elixir strategy for international collaborations, and recently this bridging force for Elixir turned into this life science data infrastructures interest group. So it's a fora for a slightly bigger community of life science data infrastructures. And I can think that we have a lot in common in this context. So if we go to the next slide, and these are content heavy, but the important aspects are quite just a few. I'm not sure if there's an animation on this one. If you click through the animation, there should be some more information around this Elixir tools platform. There we go. This is an example of a platform where you can see that there's a lot of efforts going into bridging to different international projects, other infrastructures, and also the RDA. So the platform itself has kind of made these connections, and they are made at the node level oftentimes. So it's each individual node are engaged in many collaborations, and we don't have a comprehensive view at the central Elixir level so far. And that's something that we might be working on in the future. If you go to the next slide. And this is another example of a platform. This is the Interoperability Platform. And this illustrates some of the services that are provided. And here we can see, for example, to the left, the FAIR Cookbook and the RDM kit, pretty small, but they are there. If you click through the animations here, you can also see that there's links to different international projects and also international collaborators of other kinds. And we're trying to kind of tie all the resources and services together wherever we can. If you go to the next slide. So this is an example of one of those services, the FAIR Cookbook, which is a resource for people who are trying to implement FAIR in their project, providing recipes on how to do things on a very hands-on level. And this is free to use, and you can also contribute to it. If you go to the next slide. Here we also have another resource for research data management, and this is also trying to tie together different resources, linking to the FAIR Cookbook, but also to our tools registry and providing contextualized details on how to implement different aspects of research data management. If you go to the next slide. And here we can also see an ongoing effort of us trying to map how these services are supposed to be interconnected to provide the most value. So in the future, we hope to kind of have a uniform ecosystem of these services. And in the ideal case, we would like to see this connect to international collaborators to as large extent as possible as well. So I think those are my slides. Thanks.
Thanks, Volmar. Over to Susan.
Thanks. Okay, so it's a little small for me, so I'm going to try to make sure that I capture everything. So as you know, I'm from the NIH, and I think I'm joined by one additional colleague from NIH. I think Claire's is. Yes. Claire's here. She's also from NIH. So just a shout out to Claire. And when I'm part of my section is done, I can just see if she wants to add any additional notes from NIH. But we're 27 different institutes and centers. Each institute and center has its own capabilities, its own mission, its own funding priorities. And so, maximizing the value generated throughout our NIH efforts has been one of my goals, basically to better leverage our infrastructure to make it possible to connect, to find, interconnect, and interoperate across our different data sets and our different resources, and to support our data management and data sharing policies. As you know, NIH has a new data management data sharing policy that will take effect on January 25th of 2023, which says that all NIH funded investigators, those who are awarded through grants, through contracts, through other transactional authorities, even our intramural researchers, must develop a plan for how they intend to share that data, which metadata they'll be using or or working towards developing, where they intend to share that data, and any restrictions on data sharing that grant may have. So this is a big sea change for NIH. We're also working to enhance our algorithms, creating resources that promote the ease and use and effectiveness of our operations, and then developing a diverse and strong biomedical data science workforce. So these are some of the activities that we're really focusing on. And of course, this working group, interest group, for me is really focusing on the first bullet, which is creating better interconnectivity, better interoperability, and better collaboration across all of our different resources, including the ones at NIH. So the next slide is just to highlight. Jeff asked when we were developing the agenda to just talk a little bit about some of the very specific collaborations that NIH has with RDA. So, and this is really the work of Dina Paltu and Dawei Lin, the first one, the RDA COVID-19 group that developed particular guidelines and details on depositing different data sources in the common data hub for COVID. So this would really foster publications and global data sharing during the pandemic. It was really quite impactful. The second working group that we've worked closely with RDA on is something that's really key for me in particular, is the metadata standards catalog, which produced a machine readable catalog of metadata standards that was submitted by all RDA working groups. So this is has really an end user input and an API form for submitting standards. That also, there's a user interface for querying and reporting, and an API software to retrieve suitable standards. This is something that we've really been thinking about, is how do you enhance the use and usability of metadata, particularly in our platforms. Many of our platforms are funded by different ICs. They all have developed different data models. So interoperating across those data models it has been a bit of a challenge and certainly a goal. And then the third working group that we've worked a lot on is the Fair Sharing Registry, connecting data policies and standards and databases. There's the Fair Sharing Registry, which is a curated and informative educational registration, linking standards to site data and metadata and repositories. So this is another activity that's been pretty impactful for NIH. There's a 2-page guidance to users and producers on standards and repositories to describe how they can select their resources, and advice to policymakers on how we can best recommend resources for our policies. And this is coming to play very particularly in our data management and sharing policy, as we're making recommendations to researchers on standards and repositories that they can now share their data in, that are helping support the FAIR principles and the trust principles, another outcome, I believe, of RDA. So lots of really impactful work here. And the next slide is an effort that we've been doing as a pilot for at least a year and a half, is to really break down those data platform silos at NIH to interconnect or create a sort of data mesh between at least 5 different big platforms. I'm sure that at least some of these you've heard of: Biodata Catalyst, our Gabrielle Miller Kids First platform, our Cancer Research Data Commons, hosting a number of different data types all addressing cancer research, and then our Anvil, which hosts the GTEx data and other genomic data, and then of course the NCBI dbGaP platform. Our goal is to establish and implement guidelines and technical standards that really will empower our researchers to analyze data across a number of different hosted platforms. We want to make it easier for investigators to log on and navigate across platforms. So this is sharing standardized credentialing systems for authentication and authorization, enabling search functions across our platform so researchers can log into any platform and then easily find and access data across other platforms. And then, and this is really challenging in handling data compute across multiple platforms. So it's everything we do is based on an agile framework and use cases. This is Melissa Wilson's use case. She's really interested in examining sex as a biological variable. So she really wants to look at the state of gene calling in the X and Y chromosome. What she was able to do is to log in. She actually, I think she did this work in Anvil, but she was able to log into Anvil, create a Terra workspace, and then reference data in the Biodata Catalyst, the Cancer Research Data Commons, and Kids First. And then she used a standard called DERS, which is a GA4GH standard, so that she could access that data without having to copy it across different cloud platforms, and then do her analysis. So she was able to get access and in less than a week do 11 petabytes of data calling, gene calling essentially, across these 3 platforms. And so for us, it was a test, the pilot test, that this can go forward. We're now standing up a much larger program based on the work we've done for about 1.5 years to really leverage all the capabilities of the platforms that are funded by NIH and create a better data fabric so that researchers just have access to better data and can do their analysis in the platform of their choice. And so for me, this is the end of my slide, but I do want to acknowledge that I have a colleague here from NIH. So I'm going to see, Claire, if you want to come off mute and say anything additional.
I think you covered it really well. I'm just amused to myself because I'm one of those siloed programs, the All of Us research program. But we have such a huge amount of data that we're like, we're not a silo. But this sort of cross-platform computational capabilities is, I think, what we are aiming for in the future and what I've been nudging us towards. So with all luck, we will be part of this research infrastructure in the future.
That would be great. We've talked to all of us for a couple of years now, and I think that, you know, there's some security issues that we need to work through because we are changing security boundaries. There's a lot under the hood that I didn't talk about, but one of the things that does happen is that we have to really think very carefully about cybersecurity in this federated space, and that's something that we're still working through. But with that, I want to thank you, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. There's just so many rich avenues we can pursue, and when we think about data infrastructure in a sort of data sharing world.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan and Claire. Now we're going to hear from Alicia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So my name is Alicia Wood-Charlson, and I'm going to be representing the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Science. Ramana Madapur, the program manager for these 3 programs that I'm going to talk about, was unable to join today. I'm actually at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and mainly work on the Kbase platform, which I'll talk about. The U.S. Department of Energy funds a lot of basic research, but these are 3 infrastructure programs that we thought would be relevant and of interest to this group. So the first is the Joint Genome Institute. It is an official Office of Science user facility, which means it provides a resource for the community, takes physical samples and converts it over into data, typically sequence data, omics data, but they also do metabolites, etc. It's been around for 25 years. This is their 25th anniversary and was involved in sequencing of the human genome originally. So there's a lot of data that have been produced and a lot of samples that have been sequenced through this facility. This slide was put together actually by Kirsten Fagnan, who's the Chief Technical Officer of the JGI. And so it's very data heavy, but I think that is appropriate for what we're talking about for infrastructure. For 3 years, from 2018 to 2021, there was a lot of data that were produced, a lot of users that use that data, and then they've been starting to track actual impact of the JGI data and tools, and how many times it gets cited in the literature and how many proposals are being submitted. The JGI is really starting to work more towards reusable workflows, and so focused on Docker and WDL to try to support the FAIR principles for how data are produced. And so trying to figure out how to do that at scale related to some of the comments that Susan was talking about, these large, massive compute pipelines that need to be run on any infrastructure possible. JGI is also really working to improve their data stewardship. JAMO is the JGI archive and metadata organizer. That has a huge ask of basically enforcing standards and tracking provenance from physical sample through laboratory processing, through all of the sequencing, and making sure that we can actually track all of the variables that are involved in that, you know, what sequencer it was on, what library prep they used, etc. And that's all tracked in JAMO, and they're applying sort of standards across the program for the various different user programs. There's plants, fungi, the microbial program, etc. And the data are all stored at the local supercomputing facility at Berkeley Lab, but then also backed up at Oak Ridge, and then everything, all the sequence data are also submitted to NIH's NCBI SRA repository as well, so it's made available that way. JGI supports open science within the revised use agreements, and they're moving into actually supporting, again, try to get all of these silos, so making sure the data are available across programs and across agencies, working closely with Kbase and NMBC, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then trying to understand how to link sample information as well as data. And that's a couple of working groups that I'm helping run across those, is how do we define samples? Are we all describing the environmental context of the sample the same? And then making sure that we can actually take the data from those samples and compare them, and it's meaningful if we run them through the same pipelines, so that we're not comparing apples and oranges, we're actually aware that we're comparing apples to apples. And then we're all adopting ORCID as a place to put, to link our data produced to those that are actually using these facilities, and making sure that the data credit follows from there. Next slide, please. There's also a new pilot project called the National Microbiome Data Collaborative. This was recently funded, and what they're trying to work on is actually building a data science ecosystem specifically for microbiome research, focused on FAIR principles around multi-omics data. So focused on metagenome, metatranscriptome, metaproteome, and metabolomic data, and really trying to dial in standards that represents environmental samples, so that people can actually find data in a way that they think about science questions. All of that data then is processed through reproducible workflows. All of those workflows are available at GitHub and are also in WDL, so they are transferable across platforms. And in the initial pilot, one of the main things that we recognized in conversations with our community, that many of you are probably aware of, is that most people don't know standards exist, and they're not really sure how to do good data management. And so the multitude of logos on there, really just to emphasize that's going to be a big focus for community engagement and outreach through the next renewal process, is really working on training people in the community across the variety of microbial environments on how to actually use standards and how to actually plan appropriately for good data management. So that's going to be a big output from the next renewal from this project. Next slide, please. And then finally, there is the U.S. Department of Energy Systems Biology Knowledge Base, otherwise known as Kbase. This provides a free open source graphical user interface for people to do complex analyses in bioinformatics. This is set on top of a Jupyter Notebook framework, so it allows for collaborative knowledge creation, discovery, and then dissemination. And we're really working to design this so that it's easily accessible for students. We're ramping up an educators program that's been quite successful. We've launched it during COVID, and a lot of educators have been able to get undergraduates to do data science virtually, which has been quite successful. We also partner with people that actually write code. So the bioinformaticians that are actually writing these, we have a way that we can actually wrap their tools and put it into the graphical user interface and make it accessible to people that are not familiar with command line. The goal for this infrastructure is to really support the full research data lifecycle. So all the way from representing physical samples through that standardized sample metadata to the data that are produced from them in a variety of different components, multi-omics, chemical, et cetera, and then have analysis tools that allow people to do correlations and explore the data in a way that makes sense to them. So all the way from samples to publication. We currently have over 24,000 users, and there's some statistics from our 2021 report. And we do have a global audience. I haven't quite gotten like a firm hold on anyone in Antarctica, but otherwise we span 6 of the continents. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick slide. We're relatively new to RDA and are involved in a couple of these that have already been mentioned before. But the NMDC does have a Go Fair implementation network. We're all listed on the fairsharing.org, and then we're working with several standards and ontology groups to make sure that we're implementing those reproducible languages in the system so we can work on interoperability. And then we collaborate quite extensively with NIST. So Robert Hanisch, who's on the board of RDA, is also on the board for the NMDC, for example. And that's all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Now I'm just going to give a brief summary of the Australian Biocommons, and I'm joined by a colleague, Stephen Manos. He's our Associate Director of Cyber Infrastructure, and I think he's going to say a few words at the end as well. So I guess before I started, I guess wanted just to comment that I guess the scale of Australia is considerably different to that of Europe or the US. So our population is about a 10th to a 20th of those. So, but everything, you know, there's so many alignments with what we've heard, and we're trying to do lots of things similarly in Australia. So our mission is to support life science research communities with community scale digital infrastructure. And by that, I mean, you know, not solutions for one group, but solutions that can be deployed for many to benefit from. And we are building computational services for sophisticated analysis capabilities, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Something we're really just, I guess, playing with at the moment is to enable better digital asset stewardship. And I think that's particularly relevant for RDA. So we're really interested in learning from other groups there. And we have a really vibrant and well respected training and support team. We have a lot of training events that happen around the country in bioinformatics training. I'll just mention that we're also funded through the Australian federal government through a scheme called the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy through an organisation called Bioplatforms Australia. Now, how we operate is that we are aiming to really engage communities through various topic areas. And these are just some of them shown on the slide here. So some of them are very much focused around a bioinformatics methodology or approach, such as de novo genome assembly or annotating genomes, through to microbiome analysis, but also, I guess, broader areas like metabolomics and proteomics, comparative genomics, human genomics, single cell omics, command line users. Now, the point of this is really to give us, you know, a vehicle to attract users that eventually, you know, are really telling us what their challenges are and what's missing to enable them to do their research better. And so these aren't, you know, massive areas. They're actually sort of fairly, well, you can argue some of them are actually massive areas, but they're kind of a tangible group. And what we aim to do is facilitate interactions between those communities of researchers and a whole range of computational and bioinformatics infrastructure providers, both here in Australia and also internationally, to build a more fit for purpose, flexible and cohesive data analysis ecosystem. Now, this next slide, don't worry about all the logos there. It's just to remind me to really say that we do interact with a lot of groups within Australia who are providing the hard infrastructure. So our national high performance computing facilities and cloud, academic cloud providers, the people who run the network, the people who run the authentication. We interact with similar groups at a state level. We also interact with many groups at individual institutions, but we also work a lot with research collaborations in different themes. So, you know, they may be in human genomics or in environmental science, so on and so forth. We also work increasingly with commercial cloud providers, which is really part of the equation, and Stephen will probably update us on that later. And at the bottom there are some of our international collaborators. So you heard about Elixir before, and we have really strong collaborations around tools and workflows, around ensuring and making sure that work analysis workflows are better described and more portable across multiple infrastructures. And we have a really a strong interest in Gen 3, which has come out of the NIH to support various human genome sharing projects in Australia. So our major activities and collaborations are listed here. And I guess, as far as data infrastructure for analysis goes, one of our flagship services is Galaxy Australia, and it's part of the usegalaxy.star group. So that also includes Galaxy Main, which is in the US, and Galaxy Europe. And this is if you're not aware, it's a web-based platform that's incredibly powerful to perform GUI-based bioinformatics analyses. We're also run a national service of Apollo, which enables people to curate their genomes, genome annotations long-term. And we are liaising with the guys in JBrowse to make sure that we can contribute to the code base for that. We're also looking at a technology called Nextflow Tower that will also enable people to deploy or run workflows more easily through a graphical user interface. As I said, we're really collaborating strongly with Elixir in the tools and workflow space, so with BioTools, BioContainers, Workflow Hub, and also OpenEbench. I'll leave the computer. I'll get Stephen to talk about that at the end. But as I said, in human genomics data, we work very closely with the developers of Gen 3 and the University of Chicago, and we have some collaborations with the Kids First Data Commons, and also we are working with a coronary artery disease group here who is really interested in working more closely with the Biodata Catalyst Data Commons in the US. We also are thinking very hard about how we can share human genomes more efficiently, both within Australia and outside of Australia. So we engage very heavily with the Elixir Human Data Group, the EGA, and also through the GA4GH. We are also interested very much in biodiversity and agricultural data. These are both important for Australian the economy, and we are working with several groups to develop what we call an Australian Reference Genome Atlas, which is about bringing genomics resources for Australian native and agriculturally important species together to enable subsequent analyses. We also focus, again, Stephen might want to elaborate a little bit on this, but we're really interested, I think Susan was talking about, authentication and authorization across multiple systems. So we're exploring a lot of systems that will enable that. And as I mentioned before, we have a very strong bioinformatics training program. I really just wanted to say we're really starting our RDA journey. So I think for us, it's sort of it's greenfields for how we operate in this group. Stephen, did you want to add anything else?
Thank you, Jeff. I think you covered most of the things. I'll just quickly say that so I'm responsible for a program of work in the Biocommons called the BioCloud. The BioCloud is looking at policies, access to infrastructure, both on-prem infrastructures like our high-performance computing platforms in Australia, as well as commercial clouds and other infrastructures. We're looking at data movement and standards and accessibility. I guess where my kind of job begins after what Jeff described is really taking some of these things and making them operational. So one key example at the moment for us is Gen 3. Gen 3 is the I guess the data commons platform that is being developed, has been developed for a number of years out of the Center for Translational Data Science at the University of Chicago. So we have I guess now a very close collaboration with Bob Grossman and his team, and we're actually recently over there a couple of months ago, spending some time in Chicago with him. We are utilizing Gen 3 to build our data commons around cardiovascular disease. As Jeff mentioned, we will be utilizing it to develop a data commons around pediatric cancer data, which is very closely coupled to the Kids First data resource and the CHOP team in the States. And there are other plans afoot as well to, for example, utilize it to develop a plant protein atlas. And that project is just starting now. We have a very strong interest in making this data available through standards and interoperable through standards, such as DRS, for example, the GA4GH data streaming and data access standard. They're things that we intend to explore and implement over the coming years. In terms of access and identity, we're very closely following what's happening in the NIH with RAS. We're also very closely linked to what's happening with Elixir and the access and identity platform there. We are in the process of developing some pilots, infrastructures around that here in Oz. It's interesting that this idea of integrated identity across services is not a strong push from researchers. They don't really think about joining infrastructures in that way. But I think that we can all see the advantage of doing it, of making infrastructures more interoperable across identity, and also making it easier to exchange data across platforms as well. So we have some early pilots at the moment, which we'll be looking at joining platforms through data interoperability and through identity. A big example of that is our thread and species community, who want to build an assembly and annotation workbench, and that really means that we need to be able to link their reference data repository with Galaxy Australia, with Apollo, to name but a few platforms that exist here already. At the moment, they're all separated and segregated, and it's down to individual researchers to make sense of that ecosystem and act as the network switch between them. So we now want to kind of make that process of using those platforms in a coherent way, in this workbench way, much easier. And again, this is all going to be based off ideas that are, have begun elsewhere around RAS and Alexa AI, and really building on that here. So I'll wrap up there, but it's been a really great conversation so far. Really nice to meet you all. I'm looking forward to keeping these chats going after this meeting as well.
Excellent, thanks, Stephen. So just a time check, we're about 15-20 minutes over, so we've got 23 minutes left, I think. And we were going to cover off how we fit into the RDA, a group discussion, and then next steps, which is really where we are going to maybe discuss, how we're going to work outside of these sessions. And I think my personal take is I think it's probably better to talk about that than a group discussion right now. But I'm happy for, my co-chairs and everyone else here to also, let me know what you think about that.
I would agree to that. Maybe what we could do at the group discussion section is just select a topic that would be interesting and just highlight it, not discuss it at all.
Mm-hmm. I concur.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now I think I'm handing over to Susan for this about how do and will we fit into the RDA.
Absolutely, and just to note that we've had a long experience and interaction with the RDA. We're now a consortium and funded member of the RDA for NIH, and many of our program and colleagues sit on various working groups, interagency or interest groups, as well as birds of feather. So it's been a really rewarding experience. I think how this group may fit into RDA, the next slide. And there's certainly going to be some interest groups and working groups that are going to have output or activities that align really strongly with what we're doing. For example, while many of our platforms are not simply data repositories, they're actually significant platforms with significant amount of analytic tools. We're also, all of us, data repositories in one sense or another. And so keeping close connection with the data repository attribute group that will give us a common list of attributes that describe a research data repository and some current approaches that different repositories are using to express and expose those attributes. That's really helpful for finding data across different repositories, and also describing the data repository will be important. It may be important to this group to also look at what's happening in the metric space, the software metrics. For example, in the Software Research Alliance is really impactful, but also the data metrics working group. How do we actually make data count, and how do we recognize the implementation of standards that really look at data use metrics we might want to adopt and or work in some sense with this working group. I think there might be additional slides. So if we can switch to the next one. Okay, so this is Elixir. So those are from my point of view. There are others. There's FAIR for research software that's developing standards to help software become fair. We might want to think about FAIR for infrastructure and what that means, taking advantage of the FAIR for data and FAIR for software platforms as well. So just some ideas of activities that are happening in RDA that may be directly or indirectly impactful for what we want to do. So I'm passing the ball over for our colleagues to talk about the Elixir RDA activities and focal groups.
Yeah, so I wanted to include some slides that just gives an example of how Elixir has approached engaging with the RDA previously. And I liked, as Susan said, I mean, you have people engaged in a lot of different interests and working groups already, right, all across NIH, but and the situation is the same in Elixir. But we don't really have a complete map of who's involved in what and to what extent we have people involved in the different working groups and interest groups. That's something that we're looking into surveying, and we might get that done after summer or so. So it could be interesting to see, like, where do we have representatives that could report back and help bring in some of the outputs of the RDA into Elixir. And I think that could be something that we work a little bit collaboratively on as well. So, I mean, the RDA is connected to all of the different aspects of Elixir, ranging from the nodes into the different projects that we are collaborators on. What we do specifically to support RDA activities is that there's a travel grant that people can apply to either join in virtually or on site. And we also have a collaborative report that we're working on, or inviting members to work on. So far, I think most of the people are members of the focus group. And for example, Paulette, who's on the call today, is collaborating on the report for this year together with me and some other colleagues. And for the first time, we have decided that this report is going to be made public. And not sure when, but it will be at least. So we can go to the next slide. And then there are some examples here of topics that have been brought up within the context of the bridging force in the past. So we have had kind of shared sessions with other interest groups before, oftentimes biosharing and biodiversity. But I mean, we could invite collaborators to present or co-host sessions in the future as well. And as you can see, there's a long history here. If you skip to the next slide, we have some examples of working groups and interest groups that we know that we're involved in. But I mean, there are many more, and we don't have a complete coverage at all. But I wanted to show this because we have this life science community specific part where people are talking specifically about life sciences related to topics. And then there's these technical things that are more generic, cutting across many different domains. And both of those are interesting. And Sosun's examples, I think, is these cross-cutting technical aspects, but it's good to bring in both of these. And the ones that are in bold here is interest groups or working groups that we have a Elixir co-chair in. There might be more of them, but as I said, we haven't completed a survey yet. So, I mean, if we can get a picture of where we are represented and things that we are interested in pooling knowledge around, it could be, this could be a venue for collating things like that. Reports, just a map of where we're represented, and also interesting topics or communities that we should monitor. So I think that's what I had to present here, and I would like to open the floor for someone to maybe raise their hand or come with some comments on if they have experiences or ideas on how we should integrate with the RDA.
Lindsay?
Yes. So I am involved in a few of those, and I think the thing that would be really great to see actually is incorporating completed accepted RDA outputs. So there's FAIR for RS, there are research metadata schemas for the web. There's a lot of things that would cross apply. So in order to sort of be the most efficient as possible and getting kind of to that next step would be really great to see that.
That is a very good comment. In Elixir, we actually had that as a topic for discussion at the previous focus group meeting. And there is a listing somewhere on the RDA website of the RDA outputs and some of the adopters. And we were planning to go through like what are the member institutes that we have, and are some of those listed there as the adopters. So it would be interesting to see if we could get some examples of adoption stories that are specific to the life sciences. It might be easier to transition to adopting them in that case.
I also actually have a comment.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was also going to say it with so many heavy mandates. I think what would be really cool to see is documents that really help support researchers. It's a huge overload. And there's so much crossover that if there was a collection of resources that are kind of live curated in a way that covers a lot of different domains would be really great to see kind of as a teamwork activity.
I would support something like that, yes, as well.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in I think it was a bit of a throwaway line you said, Susan, about potentially FAIR for infrastructure, and that's not a current group, is it, across RDA? But I think it's a really interesting topic, and it sort of makes me wonder why there isn't one.
I think maybe it's something that we should actually think about and what that would really look like because we're all infrastructure. What that would look like for something like the work that we're doing, that would be pretty unique and maybe impactful. Just something to think about.
Yeah, very good. If someone writes that down, I think it would be very useful. We should probably connect somehow. I mean, related to the discussion of how we move on forward, either continue the discussion in the notes or by email or something like that.
Yeah. Now we have 12 minutes left. Now, should we go on to the next part of the Mentimeter, because that will inform, I think, how we're going to talk about, you know, how we're going to work together moving on, because I think, unfortunately, we've run out of time in this session. And then we can, I think about how we, you know, probably working a bit offline and going from there. These things always go much faster than you imagine, don't they?
Yeah, time is a tricky thing. It's relative. About the Mentimeter, it's actually self-paced, and most of the questions are open-ended, which means that it might take some time to articulate the response. I think it might be good to actually just have the discussion, and
Okay.
if you want to type as we do discuss. So you can choose your preferred mode of interaction. If you just want to raise your hand, you could do so, but make sure to also put in the comments in the Mentimeter so we can kind of keep it for later, or in the shared notes if you prefer. The general topics or questions that are asked.
Sorry, I was just going to share this again to allow people to get back there.
Fantastic. I will put the questions, all of them, in the shared notes as well. So the first one is basically what themes should we be focusing on coming up, and I mean this fair for infrastructure, I guess, is on those lines. And then there's a question on what topics would you want to prepare discussion for at the future plenary? And then there was what could the meeting event cycle look like between RDA plenaries? I mean, should we be meeting before the plenaries? I think the next plenary is, it should be in spring, I guess, if we follow the biannual cycle. And I'm not sure if we want to have more than that. And we also have, what advice would you give for this to become an effective interest group? So success factors and things we should avoid, and maybe especially from you who have experience from the RDA, how we could become as effective co-chairs as possible and set down some kind of modus operandi for this interest group. So I put all of those questions down in the shared meeting notes document at the bottom. And it's the same. Yep, sorry.
I was just going to say, for context, the next plenary is in October in Salzburg, Austria. So it's that was unusually late, or maybe they are announcing something at the end of the plenary. It's usually biannual, isn't it?
I think it was usually that it was in like November, October, but because of COVID stuff, they delayed this one through. So now everything is out of whack.
Oh, right. Yeah, but coming up, it will be biannual. If this cycle is too long, maybe we should have a meeting in between for our own sake, so to speak.
Okay, so are we going to look at the results of the Menti now, or are we going to do that offline?
Yeah, it depends if we manage to go through all of the responses.
Let me just...
I mean, I think these are not super easy questions. They require some thought. So for me, to articulate this in a meeting usually doesn't work that well, which is why I made this kind of non interactive thing.
Yeah.
So
I'm
I
thinking
mean,
that a follow-up from this meeting should probably be some homework for everyone to have a go at completing the poll, because I think you're right, Volmar, it does take a bit of thought. So we can definitely send that round to everybody. So please, if you're an attendant and you've put your name down on the list, we can send out the link to that. I think if the next session is in October, you know, maybe the chairs do want to meet prior to October to think about what we're going to do, but I would be very supportive of the interest group having a session at that meeting. I think, I guess we'll need to see if it's in person or hybrid or online. I'm guessing, and this is something we should probably talk about now, is, you know, as a global group, what's our preference for this? It's kind of always very difficult time zone wise to be an international group, and you know, we're not joined by that many people from Europe at the moment because it's an ungodly hour there, and also from Nikki in Cape Town. So you know, maybe these are just things we can quickly talk about in the last few minutes, and then we focus, you know, more of our planning offline after this.
That sounds fair. Because there are a number of people at NIH who would like to attend RDA, but approval for international travel at NIH is sometimes challenging. I would ask that we do allow for some sort of hybrid activity that will just allow our NIH colleagues to attend if they can. And I know that it's not much fun to have a meeting at 9 p.m. at night for us, or probably, I don't even know what time it is for you guys. It must be ungodly late, but that would be really, really helpful.
yes, and also, I mean, joining the interest group, if you feel sure about this already, you can go to the RDA website and join. I think we will be mailing. If we mail, we should also mail to that already existing list. And I think we have inherited some members from the Elixir Bridging Task Force.
Yeah. We've inherited about 100 people from Europe. I guess the other thing is, you know, really interested in other infrastructures. You know, it's in our charter that we want to, you know, we want to invite groups from other continents and various countries. And I think, you know, anyone who has any leads there, please reach out to any of the co-chairs, and we can investigate getting those people involved in this. I think also, just on the topic of, you know, hybrid or online, you know, from country, you know, from various countries is actually much easier, just from a cost perspective and a travel perspective, to join online. So.
Indeed.
So we have 3 minutes left. So I think maybe just we'll come up with some actions then. The first is that I will encourage everyone to join the group. There's homework to complete. We'll send that out through the emails in the list. We will get the co-chairs, and Alicia, this is where there's like only 4 co-chairs allowed, four maximum, but I really see you as a co-chair and Romana as a co-chair. So again, to be inclusive, I don't, you know, you're absolutely included, and we need to work out how to get your names on and your organizations listed on the page. But I think we will have to meet at some point to just go through the survey results and work out what we may put forward for the next plenary in Austria in October. Does that sound reasonable?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Jeff, do we know for how long our interest group is charged? Do we have a timeline for when we need to wrap up? I'm never really sure.
Never. According to the rules, it's as long as we remain active. Never. You never escape. As long as we remain active, the interest group will remain a thing. So yeah, in perpetuity. That's a better way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, if we decide to organize a working group on a topic, then the timeline is 18 months, I think. But
Okay.
no cycle for our interest groups. We are expected to deliver some sort of report after this meeting to summarize the takeaway messages. So that's something that we should probably convene about. And I'm not sure if we should send that for review to the members here as well, or the participants.
Yeah, there's actually a single slide. I've got the template that's the required format. So I will share that with the at least with the co-chairs, and we'll go from there. But we can also share it with the group. Yeah. All right. Excellent. Well, we're coming up to 1 minute to the hour, so I guess we'll wrap it up. As I said, these things always take longer than expected, but I think that's a good start. I think, you know, this was really the point of this interest group, to meet and sort of get to know each other and start to have a think about what we're going to work on. So I think it makes a lot of sense to work offline to do that. And I look forward to interacting with you all either online or hopefully at a future session. So thanks everybody, and good evening or good morning or whatever it is in your time zone.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for your leadership, and Volmar. This has been really helpful.
Thank you too. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Great. Okay.